Basically, you could look at it like this. Jesus was, and now he really is zero. He's zero, but they changed the calendar. Several times the calendar has changed. There's the Gregorian calendar, the whole, and there's before that the Julian calendar in the time of Julius Caesar. But Pope Gregory changed the calendar. So we've had many calendar fixes because the whole world was on different calendars and everything. So Jesus was probably born about 4 BC. Why do we know that? Because he was born while Herod was still alive, and Herod died between 4 and 6 BC. So Jesus had to be born while Herod was still alive. And he was crucified about the year AD 30. So there's Jesus. Now, Jesus was born of the Virgin Mary with no help from Joseph, but Joseph and Mary did marry and have children. They had 7 children, to be exact, that the Bible chronicles. Here is their oldest son, James, pastor of the first church, born sometime after Christ. Church history tells us that he was killed in Jerusalem, being thrown off the top of the highest pinnacle of the temple by the enraged leadership of the temple, because he fearlessly preached like the gospel, like the book of James. You ever read the book of James? There are 108 verses, and there are about 54 imperatives. Almost every other verse is a command. He was very to the point. And he was the pastor of the first church, and you find him in the first church council in Acts 15. But they threw him off the pinnacle of the temple in 62 AD. In fact, what's interesting is when the Romans destroyed the temple, and I can show you a picture of it, they pushed off. The pinnacle was a marked spot. It was the highest point, and it was actually like this. It was this corner of the temple, and a priest would stand, and they had a little place you'd step up on, and he would blow this long trumpet and would announce like the beginning of the Sabbath and the beginning of, Passover or whatever. Well, they took him up there and threw him off from there down. And what's so interesting is that you can actually stand on that spot. It's always I love studying the book of James, and I like going to that spot and thinking that's where he met the Lord. But he happened to write the first New Testament book. So there's book 1 of the 27. Jude, another brother of Christ, 4 are named, and sisters, at least 2 sisters, so that makes a family of 7. Jude was born after James, a year or 2, so about 3, but he lived until in about 80 AD, and he wrote the epistle that bears his name. So there's another book. Matthew, Jesus' friend from Capernaum, a tax collector born about the same period of time, dies somewhere while Paul is, all the apostles were horrifically killed and martyred, and it's a whole study of where they went and how far they spread with the gospel. But before he died, he wrote the first gospel, Matthew. Peter, who again is from the same time period, lived on the Sea of Galilee, probably either Paul and Peter were killed somewhere between 64 and 67. We know that because Nero is gone by 68, and they are martyred before Nero commits suicide. So it kind of gives us a hard number. There's an early and a late date. It doesn't matter. They were killed in the mid-60s. But Peter wrote 2 epistles, and then the Gospel by Mark, the second of the Gospels, was written by a close associate of his, John Mark. And John Mark, remember, Paul got rid of him because he was a quitter, and so Peter gave him a second, after Barnabas recovered him, Peter gives him a second chance, and by the way, Paul takes him back later. But Peter, church history tells us that at the end of his life, John Mark fearlessly stuck with Peter and wrote down his eyewitness account. So when you read Matthew's account, you're reading a CPA version of the gospel. He groups everything together. If you read Matthew, he puts all the miracles together, and he puts all the parables together, and he puts all the mysteries together. It's not chronological. It's the way an accountant would put everything in columns. Mark has endless repetitions of the Greek word kai, which means and he just, it's Peter's talking as fast as he can. He can still see it. And he's saying, and Jesus did that, and Jesus did that. And then he went over there, and then he crossed the sea. And then the demons came out. Man, you should have seen that. And it looks like a shooting script. Actually, Mark has the most events, but it's the shortest because Peter just hardly takes a breath. So there's 3 more of the books of the New Testament under the auspices. You notice that James and Jude were directly associated with Christ. Matthew, one of the disciples, Peter, one of the disciples who oversees Mark, Paul, one of the apostles chosen by Christ, who writes, and I put 14, usually it's 13, but I had to put Hebrews somewhere, and I'm not really stuck on Paul writing Hebrews except for this. The term, the just shall live by faith, only occurs 3 times in the New Testament. And the first time it occurs is in Romans. And the second time it occurs, it is in Hebrews. And the third time it occurs, it is in Galatians. And what it says is Romans tells who the just are. Hebrews tells what faith is. And the book of Galatians tells how you're supposed to live. And it's interesting that if there's a signature there, the just shall live by faith, quoting from the Old Testament, it looks like the Apostle Paul is a good candidate for Hebrews because he defines the just in Romans, what faith is in Hebrews, and how we then should live in Galatians. So it doesn't matter who wrote Hebrews, God inspired it. But to get all the books of the Bible down, Paul oversaw 13 inspired, possibly wrote a 14th. His traveling companion, Luke, his physician to be exact, was under his oversight as Luke would come and go from the book of Acts journeys to interview people and write. And he wrote what is most likely, and I want you to think about this, Paul spent so much of his time in trouble, and at the end, he had to come and appear before Nero. And so you don't just show up in the courts of the greatest man on earth in power. He has banks of lawyers, and all, because Rome was run very legally. And so Paul was in line to appeal to Caesar, who had all these lawyers that advised him what to do, but they didn't just let you show up. You had to send your legal brief. You had to send your case. Now think about it. Traveling with him was one of the most amazing writers of the day. Luke's gospel is beautiful. The language of it. But if you look at Luke and Acts, you find that Roman soldiers are never criticized. So the soldiers are not criticized. The rulers are all shown in a favorable light. That they, even though they beat up Paul, they did it according to the books, and they were good. And this little set of books most likely was the documents that accompanied Paul to Rome and were given to this palace of lawyers, and they digested it, and then while Nero was doing his thing, whatever he did, they said, okay, the next guy that's coming says that this guy from Galilee who did all these things, and one of our guys was governor then, and he verified, that he did these things, but we killed him. But then this guy kept going, and he traveled the whole Roman Empire, and he went to every one of our major cities, and as far as we can tell, he never did anything bad. He just was religious. And so Nero, before Paul faced Nero, probably Nero got a synopsis of Luke and Acts. That's the best way we can understand how Paul would have been presented, because some document had to come in front of him. And most likely, that's why Luke and Acts are made in such a way, and there are a lot of other reasons for this, but they actually, if you took John out, Luke and Acts fit perfectly because it's a continuation of the same story. And because Luke is the third gospel, John's the fourth, it's between the two, but if you picked it up, they would just link nicely. So Paul and Peter both were executed. In fact, if I had enough time, I could show you right where Peter was executed because there's a marker for it. And it was Nero's circus. Nero had a circus. Now, not with clowns and that. A circus was a chariot racing, horse racing place. And he put it, Rome is divided by the Tiber River, and most of the 7 hills of Rome are here on this side of the Tiber River. But over here was a big enough space that Nero could put this circus. And right in the center, he put one of those, they all liked those obelisks. They were stealing them from Egypt. So he put one of those right in the middle. And guess what? It's still there, by the way, the obelisk. Only what is all the way around it now is the Vatican. And so you actually, if you ever go to the Vatican, to St. Peter's, the obelisk in the center that Michelangelo designed marks the spot where Paul was crucified, beheaded outside the city. They took him outside the city on the other side of the Tiber because he was a citizen, and they beheaded him. And we're not sure where, Peter also, the Roman Catholics say that he was also crucified probably in that circus. So it's very possible that outside the city, both of them, but it doesn't matter. It's just very interesting that they both died very close together at the same time. Then the last of the apostles, he was very young, probably younger. You notice he's born after all the rest. It's progressing this way. Probably AD 10, John was born. That means that he may have been a teenager during some of his discipling, being discipled by Christ. But he lives over 88 years. He writes 3 epistles, a gospel, and the book of Revelation. And if you're adding up, there are all the books of the New Testament, all written within, the actual writing of them is within about a 50-year period of time.